Good morning, opinion lovers everywhere, and welcome to the last Outsiders of 2023, the show that is too woke identity politics, anti-Semitism, militant transgenderism, and political correctness on steroids. What? The last remaining one true Conservative in the British Tory party, Kemi Badenoch, is to militant transgenderism and woke politics on steroids.
We see it with men exposing themselves in bathrooms. We see it with people trying to access single-sex spaces, such as women's prisons, when they have been convicted for violence against women and their victims are being forced to refer to them with female pronouns. That is not right. That is not right. So we have to make sure that we can sweep all that away.
Sounds reasonable enough, but hang on. Looks like the Labour-lovey MP Kate Osborne disagrees.
And you've also made these statements using inflammatory language that likens children and young people coming out as trans to the spread of a disease.
I've never said that. That is a lie.
Well,
that is a lie. And I think you should withdraw that statement. That is a lie. You are lying. You are lying.
I'm not lying to you.
You are lying. I have never ever used the word disease. And I think this is exactly what I'm talking about. You are making statements in the select committee that are untrue.
You've just called me a liar.
Can I just remind the Minister that is unparliamentary?
Right.
Language
what she has said is not true. It's not true. And we have to use facts in this room. We can't just make stuff up. This is what I'm talking about.
Well said. But did you catch the Labour woman's language inversion trick there? She falsely accused Kemi Badenoch of saying something, then immediately twists it around and claims she is the victim of Kemi calling her a liar. Classic.
I absolutely agree with you. I just don't think that your facts necessarily...
When was that statement made? And where?
So this is the government's own data.
No. You said I used the word disease. When?
I don't know. Did you?
Of course I didn't.
Well,
and so you don't even know where that came from. Where did you get that from? Where did you get that from?
I'm not here to answer your questions.
Yeah, because you don't know. Because you don't know. it is not true. And you should not be saying that in this committee when you don't know where that statement came from.
I'm not calling you a liar. You called me a liar.
Can we please make sure that both of you use parliamentary language, please? I won't have this degenerate.
Well, I will not have my name maligned by people making false statements about me. That is not true. We have to do better than this.
Fantastic, Kemi Badenoch, a true Conservative. I'm pleased to say Kemi used to work at the Spectator magazine in London, and she is now being tipped as a future Conservative Prime Minister for Britain. It cannot come soon enough. But while we wait for Kemi to get to Downing Street, let's grab the latest Outsiders news. Liz and James, before we get stuck into it, obviously we should pay our respects to the Bedouin peoples of Dubai and their caravans, past, present and emerging. And whatever you do, don't call First Nations or First People or First anybody's primitive, says Chris Bowen, and you must be sacked if you do. Perhaps someone needs to send Mr. Bowen a dictionary for Christmas. The word primitive derives from the Latin prime, which means first or original. James.
Well, yeah, this all comes back to, a number of really amazing scenes this week. First, we had Chris Bowen at Dubai here. Do we have the grab?
Let's have a look. Take it away, Chris.
Gotta play.
Friends, I begin with an acknowledgement that at the heart of action on climate change must be profound respect for those who've cared for our respective lands for millennia, the Indigenous people across the world.
Kick it away, James.
So this whole, Australians voted no by 60 to 40% on this all of this stuff. I was told reliably that, if we voted no, we would never get a welcome to country again. But apparently we're going off and imposing these things in Dubai, of all places. I absolutely love the incredible self-regard here of Chris Bowen. What does he even mean by that? Because if you trace all of us back far enough, we're all indigenous to some place, somewhere, something. Does this mean that, Celts in England can now have a say over whether or not we have nuclear reactors in England?
Liz.
Well, it just added to the comedy that was always COP28. The very fact that this was held in Dubai, the UAE being among the top 10 oil producers in the world, the fact that the COP president in the lead up to this hallowed conference was actually caught out saying he intended to use the conference, being CEO of an oil company himself, use the conference to hopefully make a few oil deals during the meet and greets. And the fact that he didn't think it was necessary to phase out fossil fuels.
And presumably he is one of the indigenous people that Chris Bowen was referring to.
Well,
so Chris Bowen should be listening to the Bedouin tribes, all of whom want the oil.
There you go.
They do.
This
Here's
guy
the thing,
Bowen is an idiot. I mean, seriously, as Andrew Bolt pointed out rightly during the week, this is so anti-science, this idea that certain people looked after and cared for the environment, and then along came evil old industrial revolution which destroyed everything. Memo to Chris Bowen: more people have been dragged out of poverty, misery, short lifespans, horrific deaths, child malnutrition, all of that because of the industrial revolution, James.
But, here's the thing. I mean, yes, you're absolutely correct about that. But what is also really interesting here is the way, all of these different sort of leftist ideologies have kind of fused into one. And so, you had the sort of Greta Thunberg, fall of man, carbon emissions kind of original sin sort of thing. And that's now fused with the whole racial thing that's the big thing on the left now. And so now the original sin is about indigenous people, not the environment. Now, of course, they've fused together here in this marvelous bit of poetry from Chris Bowen. But the one thing I'll say about COP28 is that there was a headline, I think it was in the Sydney Morning Herald, that said COP28 has become the new Davos. It's become the new World Economic Forum. And to which I say, at first I'm like, oh, Jesus, God, not a number of these. But now I'm thinking, actually, hang on. If people are going to get together, cut deals, call for more nuclear power, and, talk about keeping the energy flowing for global prosperity, I'm actually okay with that.
Well, we'll talk later in the show, too. We're delighted to have Ian Plimer on the show. We've got Bridget Mckenzie on the show. We've got Sharon Haskell in a minute, which will be fantastic. But we will talk more about the fact that, of course, COP28 said, let's go nuclear. And Chris Bowen was left standing alone, so he dreamt up this other nonsense to get himself some publicity. What a joke. Alice Springs Mayor Matt Patterson has raised concerns that, wait for it, James just mentioned, we voted no to the voice, you voted no to the voice, 60% of Australians voted no to the voice, but no, what are Labor going to do? They're going to bring in loads of voices, James.
Well, yeah, so this is this new idea that, okay, so we heard you loud and clear on the national voices, we're not going to do the big constitutional voice, but instead now we can still do local ones, we can still do regional ones, all of that. Now, Matt Patterson, who I think is one of the great Australians for helping to bring to the attention of the country really some of the horrors that have been going on in Alice Springs while, Albanese and all of them were swanning around trying to get this voice over the line. He has said, no. This is just going to be more bureaucracy. And it all comes down to the point which we made on this show through the entire referendum campaign, which is that if it is the government's job to listen, you don't need a constitutional amendment. You don't need new bureaucracy to do it. You just need to get out there and do it. Are your ears painted on?
Liz.
Well, we saw this even before the referendum, even before it was a very comprehensive no. The states charged ahead. South Australia had their own voice to Parliament. Queensland had inked their path to treaty. That was going to cost millions of dollars per tribe. Victoria's got their statewide body trying to make up a statewide agreement. WA had to trash their cultural heritage laws because that just turned into way too much of a farce. And New South Wales is still debating what they'll get up to. But the fact is, even before the vote was cast, governments around the country made it very obvious, we don't give a stuff what you guys actually think.
And that's the problem.
We are pressing ahead with this agenda. And once again, it's just another example where governments show complete contempt for the very people who have elected them. At the end of the day, it didn't matter what we voted. They were always going to do what they wanted to do.
And this is why it's so critical at the next election. OK, if they're going to ignore you on the voice, make sure that they learn the really hard lesson: out. Out with Labor.
Yeah.
They are a joke. They are a farce. They're all over the shop at the moment, James. We've seen it on every single portfolio. They are clueless. They are running around like headless chooks. We'll talk about their disgraceful voting at the UN for the ceasefire in a moment. But, James, they go into Christmas. What are people going to be talking around at the barbecues? I mean,
well,
you know.
can they afford to light the barbecue? I mean, this is a big thing that, and what are they going to be putting onto it? There have been survey after survey saying that people are cutting back their spending this year because it is really hurting out there. This government, putting aside the voice, putting aside the vote in the UN, putting aside the fact that they can't hold a line on anything now because they're now completely at sea politically about what they believe, they have presided over, and they now own. They cannot blame Peter Dutton. They cannot blame the previous coalition government for it. A huge backsliding in people's standard of living under their watch. That's what people are going to be talking about. It's all very well and good for us to talk about, the politics of that or the other thing. People out there are being asked to both shoulder the burden of inflation through higher interest rates and also through higher prices. And there's an awful lot of people who are copying it both ways. We'd have a lot of them viewing this show here. While many of the problems that are causing it, people are getting off scot-free. So you bring in, 500, 600,000 migrants. They're not affected by interest rates. They've got money coming from overseas. They're fine, and they are flooding the economy with more money. The same thing with all these cost of living measures, Oh, well, here, let's make inflation worse. So pump some more money into the economy to make it worse, but get you through this a little bit. It doesn't make sense, and it's a vicious spiral of Keynesianism that I think Jim Chalmers, for all of his, smiling profiles that he's been doing, I think has really just lost the plot on.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll also just quickly mention that they're all over the shop on our military, our AUKUS deal. As soon as they voted against at the UN, I mentioned the vote against the ceasefire. Well, that was also a vote against our number one ally, the USA. And what did the USA immediately do? They said, OK, you're voting against us. Why don't you send a vessel, a military vessel, over to the Middle East and come and play with the big boys? Because, of course, if we're going nuclear, which you'll be telling us about this later, I'm sure, the Americans have voted for AUKUS.
Yes.
That means we've got to step up. That means we have to be a nuclear power with a nuclear industry here. Labor, you can't talk out of both sides of your mouth at the same time. We have to be a nuclear power for the US to take us seriously. Now, we also had, there's been a surge in anti-Semitism in Australia and around the world. We'll be talking to Sharon Haskell about that and much more in a second. But I wanted a couple of great Australians were honoured these past few days. One for her amazing work in the present, the other for his amazing legacy. Both, I'm pleased to say, fans of Outsiders. Gina Rinehart was honoured by the Australian Financial Review at their inaugural Business Person of the Year dinner the other night, described as, quote, and I love this, a lively gathering of mavericks, stirrers and outsiders. Yes, Gina Rinehart was crowned the Financial Review's 10th Business Person of the Year. As editor Michael Stutchbury said, Gina Rinehart's Hancock Prospecting Empire, which is the biggest private company in the country by some margin, delivered another record year of shipments from its Roy Hill iron ore mine, with robust iron ore prices driving profits to more than $5 billion, which, of course, all goes into the coffers of the Albanese government. The company has a staggering, or the taxes do, the company has a staggering $38 billion in assets on its balance sheet, propelling Mrs. Rinehart to the top of the AFR's rich list for the fourth straight years. In the last 12 months, Mrs. Rinehart has also expanded her interest to a string of other industries. Peter Dutton said, quote, this award not only speaks to Gina's incredible contribution to our nation in 2023, it is testimony to the work of an Australian patriot whose endeavours in mining and agriculture and support for sport and philanthropy have bettered the lives of many Australians. Mrs. Rinehart herself explained during an entertaining speech about Blind Freddie that in agriculture it's no longer the dangerous fires, droughts, floods that are the main problem, but it's man-made ones, it's government ones. And Mrs. Rinehart went on to explain what Blind Freddie can see, that farmers are terrified by the amount of prime agricultural land being swallowed up by the madness of Chris Bowen's policies. As Mrs. Rinehart said, quote, it is estimated that 1/3 of prime agricultural land will be taken over. What do you think, Mrs. Rinehart asked, this will mean to your fresh quality food availability, and to prices. And she then went through a long list of the disastrous knock-on effects: excessive payroll taxes, restrictive government red and green tape, net zero ideology. All these things are having a disastrous effect on household prices. And she said when primary industries are used to carry onerous government burdens, blind Freddie knows that these costs must and are being passed on to you. We need policy that helps Australians. We need policies that make investment in our country worth doing. If we have any interest in maintaining our Australian standards of living, blind Freddie, she said, knows we need to roll out the red carpet for investment. Now, I'll be talking later about another red carpet that was rolled out, but let's go now to Sharon Haskell. Stunning backflip by the Albanese government this week after it voted in favour of a United Nations resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. Joining us now to discuss is member of the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Security Committee and Israeli MP Sharon Haskell. Sharon, it's great to have you back on Outsiders. You've been out here before in this studio and we missed you, but times have changed. Tell us what your thoughts were about Australia voting for a ceasefire, first of all.
Well, I have to say, and I said that to an Australian delegation who's visiting us just during this week as well, that we're absolutely heartbroken and we're really disappointed. I mean, Australia is one of our greatest allies throughout the years. And those strong bonds have been very important for us Israelis. That declaration literally said to Israel, give up and surrender to Hamas. I mean, what do you mean by having a ceasefire? A ceasefire from an organization, a terror organization that wants to completely annihilate my family, to genocide me and my friend and murder us until the last one of us? How can we go on a ceasefire after seeing what they have done and after their leadership is saying time and time again that if they have the opportunity, they will do that again? How can I, as a woman, fall asleep at night thinking of all the horror that they've done to women, how they abused them and abused their corpse? I mean, to really a ceasefire means that Israel will surrender to Hamas, and we cannot do that. If I want my children, my family to live here in Israel in safety, then we have to eliminate Hamas. And I have to say, what you see in Gaza, those images that are coming are on the hands of Hamas. I mean, they don't care for the life of Israelis, but they also don't care for the lives of Palestinians either. They're using them and abusing them. They're using them as human shields. They're shooting from dense populated areas. They are hiding their bunkers and ammunition in schools, in hospitals. Just last week, they shoot rockets towards our cities from the humanitarian area where Palestinians flee. What do you think is going to happen? And so, you know, when Hamas leadership is saying that it is not their job to look after the Palestinians, but the international community, I expect from the international community to understand that eliminating Hamas is a mutual goal. This is radical Islam that we're fighting. We're fighting on the values that both of us share of freedom and liberty and equality. And so this is a mutual goal that we're actually fighting. And if you want a better life here for Israelis and Palestinians, you need to support us in eliminating this terrorist organization, this ISIS organization.
James.
Sharon, as a member of the Foreign Affairs and Security Committee, I'd like to get your reaction to the Albanese government's decision to bring in over 800 family members of Australians from Gaza, given that we know that at least 75% of Gazans approve of Hamas and what they've been doing. The Albanese government says they have done security checks, but how is that possible when there's not a government in Gaza and certainly no Australian representatives where you would be able to do any of the sort of things that you might do with somebody coming from Israel or the United States or a normal country?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's quite worrying. We know that there are also radical Islamist cells in Australia as well. And your government is fighting the same war that we're fighting against radical Islam. I mean, we are at the front, but if you know, they're coming knocking on the back doors, and that's in your country, in Europe, in America. And accepting some of them, they have to go through a lot of screening and a lot of checks. I mean, look, there is 800 people, population of the Christian community that has gone underground after it's been persecuted by Hamas. They are underground, and I'm trying to find out, and maybe we can give them refuge even here as well. But that's the Christian community that's been persecuted there. You need to be very careful because they're very good at hiding their identity. Just yesterday, you see different images. They are saying some people are reporters, some people are doctors, but you know that they're actually Hamas activists. They've been taking part in a violent attack against Israel as well. And so, you know, it's worrying. And I think Australian citizens need to be worried as well.
Sharon, we're having trouble there with the sound, which is really bad, but just very, very quickly before you go, you have called for Israel to get out of the United Nations. You're very unhappy with UNRWA. We've increased our spending with UNRWA. Can you just very quickly in 30 seconds tell us your concerns about UNRWA?
Wow. I mean, UNRWA is a United Nations organization that's meant to look after the Palestinians. But on the contrary, they only perpetuating this conflict. They are teaching in their school. There's hundreds of schools in Gaza where their education system is teaching children violence, hatred, and martyrdom. This is unacceptable. If we ever want to live together, it has to start through a proper education that's based on values of tolerance, of peace, of coexistence. And just last week, when we heard that one of our hostages was being kept at the basement of a teacher at UNRWA school, it means that's a person that receives his salary from the United Nations. This is Australian taxpayers' money that goes into jobs in Gaza that are being held by Hamas activists and Hamas family members. After the evidence that we have heard recently from the hostages that are coming back, we have to fight together on taking responsibility on that money, where it's going and how it's funneling into the Gaza Strip. We are in favor of humanitarian aid. What we're against is a cover-up of humanitarian aid to terrorist organization or to terrorist activities.
Sharon Haskell from the Knesset there in Israel. Thanks so much for talking to us this morning, and please, our thoughts with you and your family. Thank you so much. Well, I mentioned before, Gina Reinhart said the red carpet should be rolled out for investment in this country. Well, the red carpet was rolled out on Friday morning, or rather it was a pink carpet that was rolled out for another great Australian, perhaps our greatest ever Australian, the late Barry Humphries, also a fan of outsiders. The State Memorial at the Opera House on Friday was a great event. I was lucky to be there. The highlight for me of the State Memorial, among all the tributes from everyone from King Charles to Elton John and Rupert Murdoch, some great gags. But the best were the reminiscences of Barry's two sons, Rupert and Oscar. Amazing and heartfelt commentary from both of them. And best of all, the extraordinarily moving accounts by Barry's musical composer and best friend Andrew Ross and his personal assistant Carl Schmidt. There was not a dry eye in the Opera House. And if you weren't there, you can treat yourself to a treasure trove of reminiscences about Dame Edna, Sir Les, Bazza, and many of his friends and family in my book, The Many Lives of Barry Humphries, which came out last week at Dymocks, Berkelow's, Harry Hartog, all the best booksellers, or wilkinsonpublishing.com.au. Now, before we go to a break, here's a little festive cheer courtesy of Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum Quartet. Take it away.
I'm dreaming of a great reset, like communism, just in smart. There's gene selection and eye detection and tone surveillance everywhere.
Hello, you're watching a very special pre-Christmas Outsiders with Rowan Reindeer Dean and Liz Sleighbells Storer. And in a moment, I will bring you the very bizarre way they are celebrating Christmas at the White House. You're going to be shaking your heads and saying, wait, They thought the way Melania did the White House up for Christmas was weird? Wait till you see this. Pull the other one, it plays Jingle Bells. But first, let's do as we always do and check in one last time for the year with the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, Joe Biden.
I want to thank my introducer. I know you're down to 35, but it's going to get down to $2,000 a year, max, 2035. So.
Did you catch that? Anyway, the president didn't become any clearer. I wonder if he didn't have enough of what was on the shelves behind him, or maybe a bit too much.
Taxpayers already are chipping in, paying a lot of money for that here at NIH to get these brilliant scientists to go out and find cures, find answers to drug problems, to drugs, with the use of drugs for health problems.
Oh, God.
But don't worry, prices may be going through the roof and society going to hell, but guess what? The Biden administration is working on what everyone is clamoring for this Christmas: new COVID vaccines.
We're already begun to secure fair pricing clauses and contracts for new COVID vaccines, 3 new COVID vaccines.
3 new COVID vaccines because, hey, it's all about Bidenomics and breathing room.
I'll give folks a little more, just my dad just says, a little more breathing room. Just a little more breathing room. That's what Bidenomics is all about.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. Shake it all about. Anyway, on to Christmas. You know, back when the Trumps were in office, it was a great sport of the cultural left to mock the way the then First Family decorated the White House for Christmas as being too, cold or weird or avant-garde. Well, guess what? You ain't seen nothing yet. Have a look at this little video released by Dr. Jill Biden to you, thank you very much, showing off the White House Christmas decorations. What the hell is going on there? Guys in suits dressed as rabbits? Who put the acid in the eggnog? Americans have gone online to blast the video, saying that it felt like something out of the Hunger Games. But there's more to it than that, because guess what? As with everything, it's all about the wokeness. The video, which manages to do what I thought was impossible, namely ruin the Nutcracker suite, is part of the broader woke Marxist agenda, which has to subvert absolutely everything it touches, especially cherished traditions like Christmas, in the service of its own leftist agenda. Because guess what? The dance troupe responsible for that video? They're an outfit called Dorrance Dance, and a trip to their website reveals much. They've got a whole page on anti-racism and social justice and links for you to go call for the abolition of prisons and defunding the police. The website also pushes authors like Roxane Gay and Ibrahim X. Kendi and is obsessed with a sort of undergraduate human resources department view of race and the world. The founder wrote on the website, quote, "I am a white tap dancer with black cultural ancestors in a society that privileges white people and whiteness." Michelle Dorrance, the company's founder, writes on the Troop's website in an essay titled, "Why Anti-Racism Work is Important to Me." Oh, and she goes on, she says, "I am easy for white audiences wanting to access and experience elements of black culture to swallow." Oh, okay. There are also links to several petitions, including one that reads, "Defund and redistribute NYPD funding by $500 million, sponsored by the New York City Wealth Distribution Project." Are you starting to get the idea here? These people would be very keen for someone to come and liberate your presents from under your tree. Again, back when Melania Trump was First Lady, her decorations were seen as some sort of political message about the coming Handmaid's Tale dystopia that everybody feared under Donald Trump. Yet, as always with the left, this turned out to be projection. And the left is the side of politics that is, in fact, politicizing everything and pushing its revolutionary message even at Christmas. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Well, it's our last show of the year, so we want some very special guests, and I'm delighted that Nationals MP Senator Bridget Mckenzie, no relation to Barry Mckenzie, are you, Bridget, is joining us.
No, I'm not.
What a shame. What a shame. Now, Bridget, we had some kind of disturbing things with the UN women. Some of your colleagues sort of rightly criticised the UN women for the length of time it took them to criticise, actually name Hamas for the atrocities on October 7th. The UN women in Australia hit back and said, oh, how dare you criticise us? What was your take on all of that, Bridget?
I've just found that incredible. For me, in these moments, silence is acquiescence. And for the UN women to stay silent, for me, says they agree, that they accept, that they condone the fact that Hamas uses Palestinian women as shields, and that it also brutally rapes Israeli women as a weapon of war. And I thought that was something that we all agreed was not part of modernity. And I think it is quite shameful of the chair of the UN women's groups. And if they really are the feminists they say they are, then they need to stand together with all women. Great strides have been made for women's rights over time, voting, etc. And that comes for all women standing together. And this is a time when no matter what your political persuasion, you should be standing up for women and their rights in this war.
Liz.
Bridget, obviously, well, most of the people watching would think the UN, any arm of it, is quite the joke, actually. I mean, we never hear the UN Women's Coalition speak out against child brides or female genital mutilation or many of the issues that we'd actually love to hear them stand out for women across the world. But are you aware of any women within the Australian government, other than those MPs named, who have placed a call to this woman and told her to pull her head in? Who do these people answer to? What can the government do?
Well, that's the problem with the UN, isn't it? They're unanswerable and unelected en masse, and I think we see that in a variety of their interventions across the world. I think it'd be fantastic for the Minister for Women, Katie Gallagher, to stand up for Palestinian and Israeli women who are being dreadfully tortured and treated by Hamas in this conflict. And I think it would actually show that they can walk both sides of the street. Instead, this government remains silent about the treatment of women, and I'm very proud to be on the side of Parliament that stands up for women's rights. And, you know, you won't hear anyone championing the coalition standing up for women's rights, but here we are doing that exact thing. And so, I think it is beholden on the government. They're very confused and conflicted about this issue. You've got Anne Ali and Ed Husick running out basically sanctioning the atrocities of Hamas, whilst you've got Josh Burns on the ground in Israel proper saying a ceasefire is unconscionable. So they're all over the shop on this, and I think for particularly our Australian Jewish community, but also our standing as a nation internationally, there needs to be consistency, and we need to be standing with Israel.
James.
Bringing it closer to home, Bridget, I was pretty disturbed to read that despite the fact that Australians voted no to a voice, we're getting a voice, or at least regional voices and local voices. Is this just proof that you can't keep a bad idea down?
James, you can tell it's the end of the season show. Look, there's no point in how many voices you have if no one is listening. And this government has refused to listen to locally elected Indigenous leaders, to representatives in federal parliament representing these communities over the last 18 months, whether that's supporting getting rid of grog bans, whether it's removing the cashless debit card, or refusing to back practical projects like the Yipirinya boarding school in Alice Springs, for town camp kids to have a safe place to stay amongst the atrocities that are occurring in the drug-fuelled violence in Alice Springs. So the government's not listening. So irrespective of if you're adding more voices to that isn't actually going to help solve the problem. And I think it goes to the fact that this government is completely ideological about how it approaches Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander issues. We've wasted $450 million this year, divided a nation, called our own country racists, when en masse, everyday Australians said at the referendum, you know what? We want to see reconciliation, we want to see better outcomes, but we're not racist and we don't want to divide our country. And I don't think more voices is actually going to solve the problem we're seeking to solve, James.
And also, Bridget, I mean, there's so many areas we could pick to where the Albanese government is floundering, but I was, appalled by the fact that we're releasing these detainees into the public, and then they seem to be arrested the next day. We release people and then they get arrested for committing some alleged crime or other. That whole thing with the detainees, really, how can the Albanese government survive with that sort of incompetence in their legacy?
Well, I think you're right. It is about competency at the end of the day. The Australian people don't like to listen to their government. They don't want them in their ear every 5 minutes, but they do expect them to get the basics right. And one of the basics is keeping the community safe. And I think the level of incompetence shown, not just by Minister O'Neill, but particularly Minister Giles as the Immigration Minister, is it just beggars belief. They knew in June this year that the High Court decision would likely make the decision to release detainees. And instead of actually preparing a framework to keep Australians safe, they release the lot and then have no idea where they are. They're asked question after question in question time about the protocols that are around that. They gave very vague answers, and now we're seeing almost a detainee a day recovered, and in some cases, because they're committing heinous crimes, and Australians are the victims of this incompetence. It's not just in that sphere, I think, Rowan, it's also the conflicting messages they're providing on climate. Bowen's over at Dubai, basically wanting to, lecturing the world to phase out fossil fuels, while Jimbo's at home thanking God at my EFO that we actually are one of the great fossil fuel producers in the country, as he banks another lazy $200 billion on the back of it. So, I mean, they're so conflicted internally, and it's a very confused proposition that they're putting forward to the Australian people. And I think they've ended the year in a incredibly poor position. Australians don't know what they stand for on Israel, on women, on climate, on Indigenous affairs, you name it, they're all over the shop.
I thought you were going to say that Jim Chalmers was there thanking Gina for the billions. But I guess God will do. I'm sure she'd be happy with that one.
Yeah, God will do. It is the season. It is the season.
But Bridget Mckenzie, let's be serious about what's going to happen next year, because we also can see the way the government is planning to set things up for next year. They're saying, all right, we've had a shocker of an end of the year, but they're looking forward to the Fed cutting interest rates next year in the United States, that having flow-on effects here, and being able to claim some sort of victory as competent economic managers. What does a coalition do then to start to provide, not just, hey, we're not the other guy, but alternate policies to say, hey, this is actually going to be a better, more properly reforming government if you give us a chance?
Yeah, absolutely, James. And I think that goes to the heart of the matter. It's why I was part of a group of coalition MPs that went to COP28, not to drink the Kool-Aid, but to attend the Net Zero Nuclear Summit that was being held on the sidelines, and also got to speak to at COP itself around you can save the planet, but not if you starve humanity, and the use of agricultural technology in a low emissions future. So I do think we're very much as shadow ministers working on alternative policies that will solve some of the challenges that our country faces. I think what we've also got to do is disclose the fact that whilst Jim's talking a big game of, you know, paying down that additional fossil fuel taxes onto the budget, they've still kept spending higher than it needs to be. They've still put more money on the budget than they did in May. And I bet come next May, they'll have additional spending again. So the Reserve Bank needs to see the government cutting spending more than they are. And so I'm not completely convinced that we won't see another rate rise next year. And out in Middle Australia, they are copping it in the neck from this government. And no matter how many times Jim and other senior ministers run through the list of cost of living relief they've implemented, people just aren't feeling it as their mortgages have gone through the roof and as, you know, energy prices, food prices and the like. So, we've got to deliver great policies that make sense and that are going to really shift the dial, but we also have to expose this government for the frauds that they are. I mean, very tin ears. You will have seen reports of, you know, the PM over with his $500 bottles of wine this week, while most Australian families in our capital city suburbs are struggling to work out how they're actually going to pay for Christmas. Exactly. And in my own portfolio area of infrastructure and transport, they're bringing in 1.5 million migrants whilst slashing congestion-busting infrastructure projects across capital cities. And so you've reasonably heard even Labor premiers bagging them out over recent weeks because it just doesn't make sense. So we've got to expose that and we've got to come up with a credible plan to put before the Australian people within the next 12 months.
Liz?
Bridget, obviously the Labor government is going to go to this break with a deep sigh of relief and hope to resurrect themselves in the second half of their term. Do you guys have any rough idea of what you think they're going to try to do in order to get the Australian public's faith back? Because obviously they're not doing well in the polls at the moment. Albo specifically is suffering in the polls for good reason. What do you think they're going to do to try and resurrect it?
Well, I think it's going to be one of their great Christmas challenges is to how to actually turn the polls around, turn the embedded sense that Albanese and his cabinet is not on the side of the Australian people. We saw that shift when they backed Qantas and Alan Joyce over everyday Australian travellers wanting just planes that took off and landed at the same time and where you could afford a ticket. We saw it on The Voice, where they stood on the side of elite bankers, sporting heroes, academics on The Voice, and then 60% of Australians said, hang on, we don't think this is the right way to go. So I think they really have to decide whose side they're on. And I think that's going to be quite a difficult internal debate for them because they're not the working class party that they used to be. No. They now represent predominantly affluent people in inner city seats, and working class Australians are seeing on a policy measure, on the economics and on the cultural issues, Australian Labor is no longer in their corner. And I think that's going to be a really, you know, it's almost an existential question for them to debate internally over the summer.
Absolutely. Bridget Mckenzie, the 3 I's sums up Labor: ideology, idiocy and incompetence. Bridget Mckenzie, Senator Bridget Mckenzie, thanks so much for joining us on Outsiders during the year, and we'll see you again next year. Can't wait. Have a very, very Merry Christmas from all your many, many fans. Thanks so much, Bridget. Before we go to the break, let's hear it again for Klaus Schwab and the Resets.
Last COVID, I gave you my chat, but for every new stash, you had to refresh. This year, a new pandemic is here. Get ready for forced injections.
You're watching Outsiders, and thank you so much for watching us, and thank you for making us the #1 show on Sky News Australia for another year. Big news, of course, this week when Hunter Biden appeared on the steps of Congress to proclaim his innocence and claim he was the victim of evil MAGA Republicans smearing his good name and twisting the light of his father's love into a darkness of smear campaigns and vile allegations of drug-taking, prostitutes, decadence and moral corruption. Fortunately, as Hunter made perfectly clear, nothing could be further from the truth.
I'm here today to answer at a public hearing any legitimate questions Chairman Comer and the House Oversight Committee may have for me. I'm here today to make sure that the House Committee's illegitimate investigations of my family do not proceed on distortions, manipulated evidence, and lies.
And that was, of course, a spoof.
Are you sure?
I think it was.
Are you sure?
Maybe not.
I don't know.
Let's check with Miranda Devine. She'll know. She'll have the scoop. She'll know exactly.
Straight from the laptop. Yeah.
Exactly. And Miranda's got another book coming out on Hunter, as you know, which will be must read next year. James, this headline here confused you. Muslims offended.
Well, yeah, I've never seen that happen before. But there was apparently a whole incident in France there where Muslim pupils were offended by a Renaissance painting of a nude woman. Now, apparently, they're going to be disciplined by the French authorities, which is good. But, it's always so funny to me with these things, guys, because we always hear these sorts of stories about, Christian rubes, total unsophisticated people being shocked by, art and so on and so forth. But suddenly, they're Muslims, so it's all right,
What is it with Renaissance nudes? I mean, the Just for Oil people are always spraying them and tearing them down.
The good
now
ones.
They're always such great examples of body positivity.
I just don't know how they're surviving in France, though. They're one of the most liberal countries when it comes to nudity. You go to a French beach and it's like, mate, that's far worse than any Renaissance painting, let me tell you.
Wouldn't know, Liz, wouldn't know. There you go. Liz, woke Canadian University. What's been happening there?
Oh, there's a story for you. So a law student slammed her woke college because they refused to put up a menorah during Hanukkah, very special time of the year for the Jewish community. And then they removed all their Christmas trees anyway.
So you can't have a menorah, so you can't have the Christmas. So this is the war on faith, isn't it?
Basically, nobody of, say, Judeo-Christian background who is celebrating this time of year, no one gets to celebrate anything.
Well, I could beat that thought. I mean, I'm sure they will have a big sort of temple of Greta Thunberg or something like that for everybody to go.
With incense burning.
No, not burning. That's a carbon emission, Liz.
Okay, can we have
say 10 Hail Gretas.
A life-size wax figure?
At Harvard, again, another issue, Jewish group on campus, a student group, they wanted to put up, as they have been doing for years and years and years and years and years, a menorah on campus. And now, of course, because it's the whole thing with Gaza, and they always say, oh, no, we're just anti-Zionist, and yet somehow it always winds up being really anti-Semitic. And now they've been told they have to take the menorah down every night by the authorities. Why? Because the authorities said, look, this will get vandalized, and it will make Harvard looked bad. Harvard looked bad.
Harvard looked bad
couldn't look any worse.
They make it look any worse.
Bad news for you, Harvard. You can't. You've got a long way to go to resurrect your reputation. An Irish teacher, Liz, has been indefinitely jailed for refusing to call a boy a girl. What sort of world are we living in?
This is just unbelievable, and yet believable in today's current climate. Yeah. So Enoch Burke, this unfolded quite some time ago. First, he was told you just can't come back onto the school grounds, and he insisted, because he's a man of faith, he's like, I simply will not do this. You can't. This is compelled speech. I'm not going to do it. Sure enough, he's still in the clinker and remains there. We don't know when he's getting out.
Well, this is the crazy thing. Ireland is really fascinating to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, it seems to be one of these countries that's become the test thin edge of the wedge to see how far they can push people on these agendas. Because really what is happening here across the West is this sort of silent civil war, because it's not, about guns and violence, although sometimes there is compulsion like jail. But when you can compel the other side to say the words, say what they don't believe, that's when you're winning. And that's what's going on here. And this is a big sinister thing that people don't even aware that it's going on.
We've also seen, as what you were talking about, Liz, down in Melbourne, we've seen the city of Stonington has refused to put Christmas signs up. They've just put "Make Merry," whatever that might mean. I'm sure
Make
the
Bloody
people
Marys?
of people of that particular area probably have their own ideas on what "Make Merry" means. After the break, I'll take a look at Labour's betrayal of Israel yet again. And we'll speak to the great Professor Ian Limer in a tick. Hello, you're watching Outsiders. This is our final show of 2023, and we certainly do appreciate you watching, and our big thanks, of course, also to Montana and Lucy, who work so hard behind the scenes to make us look good, and everybody else here at Sky. Thank you all, and Merry Christmas. Now, long-term fans of Outsiders will remember this show was born the night Donald Trump won the 2016 election 7 years ago. Well, as we head into 2024, it looks increasingly likely, as by the way, I predicted on the show over 9 months ago, that bar any mishaps, Donald Trump will be the next US president, possibly even from behind bars. Indeed, in what is a dead giveaway as to how terrified the Democrats and the loony left are, many left-wingers in America are already asking, what will the return of Donald Trump to a second term look like?
What would a second Donald Trump term look like?
Well, he cannot be the next president because if he is...
You can't imagine the things that he's going to do.
That means he can shoot the First Lady.
We're going to see violence, the likes of which we didn't even see on January 6th.
Make it illegal to run against him, to throw his opponents in jail, to shut down the media.
He will make himself into the Fuhrer, and he will make everybody raise their hand and salute him.
Using martial law against the American people.
Terminate the Constitution.
To rewrite the Constitution.
Create mass internment camps.
Mass internment camps, shooting the First Lady. Oh, and more violent than the violence that never happened. Right, got it. Okay, these people are completely deranged, but they're not alone. Please ignore all the fools from both the left and the right who are so panicked by the thought of a return of Donald Trump. The question is often posed in politics. Ask yourself, were you better off 3 years ago or 4 years or whatever than you are now? Well, the same question can be asked of the entire planet. Was the world better off 4 years ago during the presidency of Donald Trump? You bet it was. You better believe it. Take Russia. Having begun its aggressive military expansionism under President Barack Obama, Putin behaved himself during the Trump years, only to re-embark on his Greater Russia conquest project, having been convinced of American weakness and cowardice, thanks to Joe Biden's ham-fisted and botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. Indeed, The Spectator Australia 3 years ago, after Biden was elected, our cover story by David Adler and cover image by Sarah Dudley and Ben Davis accurately predicted the death of peace throughout the world under Biden and Kamala. The Trump haters all sneered at us, but we were right. Emboldened by the Afghanistan fiasco, despots and warmongers around the world seized their chance. Russia invaded Ukraine, and of course also emboldened by the billions of dollars Biden offered for hostage releases, Iran took the message and orchestrated Hamas's deadly invasion and hostage-taking and rape and murder of October 7th. The danger is that the third member of the axis of evil, China, may also feel emboldened within the next 12 months to pursue its own military aggressive agenda. Peace nixed, indeed. Terrific work, Joe Biden and the left. Before Joe Biden, under Donald Trump, Sunni Arab countries were prepared to enter into meaningful peace treaties with Israel. Under Trump's extraordinary Abraham Accords, the greatest hope, I believe, for Israel and for the future of the Middle East is Donald Trump returning to office. That would be the best Christmas present America could give the world 11 months from now. So I'm in a positive mood as we head into the summer holidays. To quote Paul McCartney, it's getting better all the time. Or as John Lennon quipped, it couldn't get any worse. Speaking of John Lennon, we have a segment here on Outsiders that we call Instant Karma. This is what happens whenever crazy woke lefties, or Islamist terrorists for that matter, get what's coming to them. Here's a member of the Turkish parliament, 54-year-old Hasan Bitmez, a fundamentalist Islamist who, after railing about Israel will feel the wrath of God, well, just after he left the podium screeching about Jews, whom some say are God's chosen people, poor old what's-his-face was struck down with a heart attack.
Tarihin azabından kurtulsanız Allah'ın gazabından kurtulamayacaksınız. Hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum.
Birleşime 20 dakika ara veriyor.
Yes, looks like God listens to preachers after all.
Instant karma's gonna get you. Gonna knock you off your feet.
Instant karma, disgracefully. And sadly, the guy did die, but there you go, that's what happens. Disgracefully, the Labour government of Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong this week completely betrayed Israel and the Jews, Australian Jews, yet again, by voting in the United Nations for an unconditional ceasefire with Hamas, much to the approval of The Guardian and all the usual anti-Zionist suspects, the ABC and so on. In doing so, Australia went against our two most important allies, the US and the UK. Worse, Albanese and Wong had us deliberately aligning with the likes of Iran, Afghanistan, and other such human rights luminaries. You can judge a country, or more importantly, a government, by the company it keeps. Let me reiterate what is now crystal clear. At every single opportunity, whenever presented with a choice between the interests of Israel or the interests of the Iran-backed terrorist-supporting pro-Palestinian anti-Jewish forces at large in the world, Labour has at every occasion chosen the latter. The Liberal Party, under Peter Dutton, has always favoured the former. Another reason every person who holds dear the existence and the values and the heritage of Israel and the Jews must, at the next election, vote for Peter Dutton and the coalition, or One Nation, but not for the Teals, who are all over the place on Israel, not for Labour, the great betrayers, and certainly never, ever, obviously, for the Greens. By the way, just to show how stupid Wong and Albanese and the rest of them are, by voting for a ceasefire, which won't happen, by the way, they are voting by definition for the possible survival and perpetuation of the evil Hamas regime. The very regime that, as Sharon Haskell said to us earlier in the show, many Palestinians in Gaza themselves are desperate to be rid of. Here's just some of them, and you won't see this footage on the ABC.
أنه قرار سلم خلاص معي هبل هذا اللي بيسويه هبل قتل شعبه السنوار قتل شعبه
اللي دمروا البلد واللي ابو العبد انت اكبر حنين
ويا هنيه ويا عباس يا هنيه ويا عباس وين الكهرب وين الغاز وين الكهرب وين الغاز
احنا دفعنا ثمن تذكرة حماس احنا دفعنا التذكرة لها.
In essence, Labour has voted to keep those people imprisoned by Hamas, whom they hate. Nice work, Penny and Alba. You do a great job. As you heard, one of the reasons Gazans are so furious is that the medical and food aid that is trucked in and paid for by us, governments like us, gullible Westerners, it doesn't necessarily go to those who need it. Rather, Hamas has armed guards, reportedly preventing the public from getting their hands on the big trucks, while only a small amount goes to the public. The true obscenity of Hamas is that it is run by murderous thugs who have enriched themselves through terror. Yet the woke West happily pours billions of dollars into the so-called pro-Palestine movement. As this sketch from Israel's top comedy show points out.
The children of Gaza are suffering. They have no food or medical supply. But you can help. Please open your heart and make a donation by clicking in the link below. Shukran and God bless you.
Cannot believe what we have brought on Gaza. Thank Allah that we are safe in the plaza. There's nothing left to eat like a Ramadan retreat. I don't really give a cause I'm hanging in my sweets. Ask money, my dog needs new Armani. Gaza skies is red, but Qatar is always sunny. You just give me money, life is pretty funny. Gaza skies is red, but Qatar is always sunny.
Cry harder.
We need more money.
People of the world.
There you go. Humour often tells those truths that others then won't say. All jokes aside, the stupidity and naivety of the woke left is beyond absurd. Many things in life we must make a choice. Not everything can be consensus. Not everything is morally equivalent. Watch here how Hamas and UNRWA educate Palestinian children versus how Israel educates Israeli children. First, here's the Palestinian kids being educated.
كيف قلت لي؟
نمسك الحجر ونرمى عليه.
تحبوش إسرائيل؟
نكره.
And here are Israeli kids being educated.
בהרבה דברים, למשל שצריכים דין ואני ערבייה.
כן, אבל איך אתם יכולים להיות חברים אם אתם כל כך שונים?
כי אנחנו גם דומים בהרבה דברים.
Palestinian kids being taught to kill and hate Israelis and Jews, while Jewish and Israeli kids are being taught to live in peace with their Arab neighbours. Unfortunately, it's not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, that Arab kids are taught to kill Jews. Here is the great, albeit controversial, British journalist and good friend of mine, Melanie Phillips.
You can see it in their educational materials, in which they teach their children. This is the Palestinian Authority. They teach their children that their highest calling in life is to murder Jews and steal all their land, to take Jaffa, Tel Aviv, Haifa. These are Israeli cities. They want the lot. And they say so. They also say it's holy war, that Israel is intent on destroying the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This lie has ignited Islamic jihadi hysteria since the 1920s. It is a total lie.
So there's no hope?
There is no hope as long as the West continues to fund, legitimize, sanitize, and incentivize the genocidal attack on the Jewish people in the state of Israel. That's what's kept this terrible war going.
Your tax dollars go to educating some of those Palestinian kids. And our kids in our schools are taught many of the similar kind of tropes that Melanie was referring to. These woke dimwits, and they are not alone, who profess to show their support for a free Palestine are merely useful idiots perpetuating, as would our Labour government, the agony of the Palestinian people being led by a murderous regime in Gaza. When confronted with the evils of the Japanese regime in the Second World War, did we say, hey, Hirohito, would you like a permanent ceasefire? Maybe we could swap a few POWs. What do you say? No. We finished the job. When we confronted Hitler, we didn't have woke lefties in power saying, oh, it's how we defeat Hitler that matters. We need to bring down the Gestapo, the SS, the Luftwaffe, the Wehrmacht and the Einsatzgruppen proportionately and show restraint. No, we didn't. We finished the job. Speaking of woke lefties, many people have asked me, yeah, but how come Hamas was able to attack in the first place, alluding to some kind of conspiracy theory? And it's a good question, one that has certainly bothered me since October 7th, having been to Gaza and saw the border and seen the extraordinary and elaborate defence networks and technology in place. So I was very interested to see an article this week in the Jewish News Syndicate by highly respected journalist Caroline Glick. Read it for yourself, but in a nutshell, and obviously I'm paraphrasing. She is saying that it looks extremely likely that it was the woke, Netanyahu-hating lefties within the defence forces who are to blame for deliberately ignoring and silencing months of warnings about what Hamas were planning, because it didn't fit their woke narrative. And even more disturbing, as I suspected all along, the whole Supreme Court controversy over the past year plays a part in that woke undermining of Israel by the BB haters. Read the article. As I keep having to point out, the whole left, wokeness simply being a modern iteration of communism and subversive Fabian socialism. Wokeness has done and continues to wreak indescribable havoc on the prosperity and security of the Western world, ours included. But let's end on a positive note. As I said, next year could well see the return of Donald Trump to the White House. Don't believe the Trump haters. This can only be good for the world. A weak US, and more importantly, a woke US, is a disaster, not only for America, but for us all. And as for nearer home, the Albanese government is about as inspiring and exciting as your average Christmas cracker toy, and about as functional. Since losing the voice, Albanese has lost his entire lefty self-confidence and woke cockiness. He's lost control of his government, his cabinet, and its agenda, and he's lost the respect of you and mainstream Australia. As I said on this show last May, we are being led by possibly the least impressive and dopiest government in our history, and that is saying something. I asked last week for who was the silliest clown in the cabinet, and sure enough, right on cue, desperate to hold on to the crown, Chris Bowen stepped up and gave a welcome to country to the Bedouins of Dubai, whose entire prosperity and well-being comes from fossil fuels. Merry Christmas, Australia. All I want for Christmas is for Australia to hurry up and put Peter Dutton in the lodge before the rest of the world writes us off as a laughingstock. Joining us now for our final show of the year, the great geologist and friend of this show, Professor Ian Plimer. Ian, Merry Christmas. Great to see you. Now, you had some news, which I found was fascinating, about who got the #1 spot in Mining Journal's sustainable kind of new approaches to mining. Tell us about it.
Well, Mining Journal is the principal journal of the industry in the whole world. And there were people on the list there, the president of China, the president of Indonesia, various company CEOs. But the person who won by a country mile was Gina Rinehart. Now, she doesn't get enough credit in this country, but certainly the world recognises that she is the greatest Australian woman this country has ever produced. And so I'm absolutely tickled pink that she's getting recognition for pulling the Hancock Group out of serious financial troubles in the early 90s. She did it herself. She didn't inherit anything. She's built a huge private company, the biggest private company in Australia, and she should be honoured for employing so many people and for paying such a huge amount of tax. And the amount of tax she pays funds some 31,000 police or 38,000 teachers or 42,000 nurses. Now, that is a great achievement. And I challenge any critic of Gina Rinehart to tell me how much tax they pay and what they do for this country.
Ian, now tell us about your take on COP28. There's so much to go through. Bowen giving us a welcome to country. We've got a call for nuclear energy. We've got the Sheikh Jabur saying we've got to have more oil. Tell us your take on COP28, Ian.
Well, Flop 28 was no different from the others. If we really had a climate crisis and wanted to have net zero by 2050, we would have solved the problem in 2 or 3 meetings. This is a giant jaunt and a party. And we sent some 48 people from this country over there. In Kevin Rudd's time, we sent something like 117 or 120 to Copenhagen. This is a giant party, but you have these people getting up giving boring speeches. But fortunately, we have Chris Bowen, the Australian minister. Now, we all know he's had a very successful charisma bypass operation. This is why people went to his talk, to hear this clown, because in boring conferences, you have to have a bit of comic relief. And here he was saying Australia's going to go all in the death spiral of renewable energy, yet other countries are saying they're going to triple their nuclear. The Gulf states are saying, oh, we're going to transition, we're going to use more gas. China's saying, oh, we're going to transition and use more coal. And Saudi's saying, well, we're going to transition too, and we're going to use more oil. And this is not a conference about climate. It's a conference about energy. We have a crisis of energy, and the world has realised it. And as soon as the Germans got back home, what happened? They slashed 45 billion off the climate budget and put it into defence. They put it where it was useful. The Germans have realised they can't run their country on sea breezes and sunbeams. They've realised they need nuclear, they need coal, they need gas. So we're going the exact opposite direction. So people went to Bowen's talk just to have a great laugh.
Well, James. I never, Ian, and by the way, Merry Christmas to you, never would have expected that Chris Bowen would be doing great comedy stylings. Maybe we could put the wisdom on of Chris Bowen on by the tree after opening the presents for a bit of a laugh. But I want to ask a serious question, though. When that COP28 or Flop 28, as you so aptly put it, was wrapping up, here in New South Wales, we were being told on a reasonably warm day, don't turn on your air conditioner, don't run the clothes dryer, don't run your dishwasher, for God's sake. You can still charge your electric car. This seems to underscore the real problem we have in this country, that on the one hand, you've got the Bowens of the world saying fossil fuels are over. On the other hand, you've got Jim Chalmers saying we need these things to keep our budget in the black. And you've got this huge regulatory apparatus, which Gina Reinhart and others have spoken about, which makes it very difficult to get energy out of the ground. You've had a lot of experience with this. How is it that the government can be, saying that they need this for the budget, but then trying to keep it in the ground? It seems like the height of hypocrisy to me, Ian Plower.
Well, yes, they speak with a forked tongue, and they continue to go down the path which they know is economically disastrous. So not only do we have New South Wales telling people on a very mild day that you've got to stop using energy, we have Victoria doing deals with Aboriginal corporations to put in more wind turbines across the country. They did a deal with a Sydney Indigenous security company, and 801 lives later, we saw the result. So they're doing exactly the same thing in Victoria. Queensland's doing the same with energy. We have an energy crisis in Australia. We also have a crisis of common sense, and we also have a crisis of good leadership. So this is just continuing the story. And I think ultimately we have to have a change of government and someone coming in like Alexander the Great with a sword, just cutting the knot.
Liz.
Ian, what do you put this government's reluctance to do anything about nuclear? Like, what do you put it down to? Obviously, they say, oh, it's because it's too expensive, the upfront costs, it's pie in the sky. I think Bowen once described it as, a pipe dream wrapped in a unicorn, etc., and so on. We know the excuses that they give us for maintaining the moratorium, etc., and so on. We know them to be untrue. Is this just about padding the pockets of their renewables mates, honouring the deals that have been done behind closed doors? Or do you see this as a much larger agenda at play?
Well, there's a number of agendas here. The left likes to frighten people. That's their mechanism of gaining power. And you can't see radiation, nor can you see carbon dioxide, nor can you see viruses and bacteria. So these are wonderful mechanisms of frightening the people and controlling the people. We've had nuclear power in this country for more than 60 years. Yes, it's a small amount we generate. And if anyone has ever had cancer and you're anti-nuclear, you are a hypocrite, because we generate medical isotopes at Lucas Heights in Sydney. We're now onto our second large reactor there. That produces 20 megawatts of power. We have the skills, we have the people. We're already a nuclear nation. So what we're hearing is absolute codswallop. Now, you hit on a very important point. One of the big investors in the renewables industry, or I call it the ruinables industry, are the super funds run by the unions. Now, the Labor Party is not a political party. It's actually the wing of the unions. It's the political wing of the unions, and they're just looking after their mates, as Labor has always done. So their reasons for objecting to nuclear are financial. Many, many countries in the world have nuclear and are very, very successful in producing cheap, reliable power. Even countries with a number of Greens and socialist countries have nuclear. So Labor is in it, not for political reasons, but purely to look after their mates in the unions. And that, to me, is an absolute disgrace.
Professor Ian Plimer, fantastic analysis there. Great insights, as you've given us all year. Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure having you on the show. And have a very Merry Christmas to your family and to yourself. And we will see you next year.
And the same to all of you.
Thank you, Professor Ian Plimer. Merry Christmas, mate. Coming up on the break, lots more. We'll speak to John Hinderaker about the wacky wokiness sweeping the USA in a tick.
Hello and welcome back to Outsiders with Rowan Dean, James Morrow, and I'm Liz Storer. This week heralded a huge win for the hardcore climate cultists. You know, the ones that like to swing from bridges, hold up peak hour traffic, glue themselves to pavement, interrupt your everyday life in their belief that if they just infuriate you often enough, you will be converted by their passionate delusions. Well, as of Wednesday, thanks to the Supreme Court of New South Wales, you can expect a lot more of this.
I'm here as a supporter of Fireproof Australia. Two people down there calling to flood-proof Australia. They're glued onto the road and they will be here to defend our beautiful country.
If we do take a stand, we can achieve so much. I am one person, I'm locked onto one car, and the entrance to this tunnel is blocked.
Turns out those U-Butte tough laws New South Wales brought in late last year to lay the smackdown on these crackpot menaces to society, you know, the ones with a maximum $22,000 fine and or 2 years jail, sounded good at the time, but turns out those laws weren't entirely constitutional. As a side note, if the politicians in this country could stop making laws that turn out to be unlawful, that'd be great. The matter of over 140 detainees springs to mind, but it seems to be happening with embarrassing regularity these days. So anyway, the Supreme Court on Wednesday struck out the parts of said legislation which make unlawful protests which cause persons attempting to use a major facility to be redirected and cause part of a major facility to be closed. Basically, unless the whole facility has to be closed down or the facility is damaged, these protesters now know they can cause major disruption to us without suffering any consequences whatsoever. The court said that these provisions were invalid because they infringe on the, quote, implied freedom of political communication in Australia's constitution. Wow, where was that when people peaceably protesting for something as basic as bodily autonomy were treated like criminals? Where's this implied freedom of political communication at a time when the only person getting attention from police during these massive from the river to the sea fests every weekend is the lone guy sporting an Israeli flag? Honestly, do me a favour. Our own government is currently debating a disinformation bill that'll kill freedom of political communication dead 7 ways to Sunday. But hey, let's ensure it's as good as gospel when it comes to the climate crazy cult's right to hold the rest of us to ransom on a whim. The Supreme Court has effectively given protesters like green light to block access to major facilities like ports, railway stations. And this is what Premier Minns had to say.
Can I just cycle all the way back to the reason for these laws being in place and why Labor supported them? People were doing, frankly, stupid things, putting themselves in extreme danger to make what they term political protests, hanging from cranes that were located on top of railway lines, chaining themselves to roads with heavy vehicles operating in the vicinity. It would only take a split second for a worker not to see a protester lying on the ground, for example, to see a tragedy take place.
I thought the laws were supposed to protect us, Mians. At least that's how they were sold to us at the time. Of course, the Premier could appeal this decision, take it to the High Court. The idea that the rest of us have to just keep sucking it up and make our way around these people while they throw tantrums is absurd. But of course, the government will never truly lay the smackdown on these climate cultists. Government is not going to punish their own loyalists. These crackpots are useful idiots, passionately championing the government's own green dream agenda, driven by the UN and blessed by the World Economic Forum. To date, this particular breed of protester has yet to get more than a rap on the knuckles from our courts of law. You may remember in May, a magistrate commended high-profile New South Wales environmental activist Violet Coco's protest activity, calling it noble. She'd just graffitied a police station and tried to superglue her arm to their window, but okay. Earlier this month, a magistrate told 4 Extinction Rebellion protesters that they were esteemed members of the community after they pled guilty to charges of interfering with public meeting proceedings. To be clear, the right of protest is sacred and should be protected at all costs. But do you think the same latitude would be shown to protesters not pushing the government's barrow? Recent history says absolutely not.
Thanks, Liz. Well, Harvard's President Claudine Gay is back in the spotlight this week after her train wreck testimony on anti-Semitism, which James talked about last week on the show. A probe launched by Harvard found instances of plagiarism in her academic writings. Well, but the university is still backing her. Joining us now to discuss it, and again, a favourite on this show, for our final show of the year, President of the Centre of the American Experiment, John Hinderaker. John, great to see you as always. This is our last show of the year. Thank you for coming on. What did you make of what's happening at Harvard and the plagiarism allegations?
Well, Rowan, Claudine Gay obviously did engage in plagiarism. What she would do is she would copy an entire paragraph from somebody else's work, and then she would change 2 words without using quotation marks. And that is specifically called out as plagiarism in Harvard's rules. Nevertheless, the university's Board of Overseers said they have actually been investigating this since October, something they had not let on publicly now. And they have absolved Claudine Gay of any serious misdeed. She's going to proactively, they said, make 4 corrections in her articles and move on. There won't be any punishment. And of course, it's not proactive when you wait until you get caught, to make just a very modest number of corrections.
And what Sorry, John. And how does this play into the, her not being fired for basically refusing to condemn any kind of, chants of anti-Semitic chants, genocide to the Jews and so on?
They're closely related, Rowan, because there's a broader point here. If you read Claudine Gay's speeches and her writings, as president of Harvard, she is not a distinguished scholar at all. She has published only 11 articles, not original work. They're all on race and politics, apparently the only thing that she cares about. But if you read what she says, she thinks that her mission is to transform Harvard from an intellectual institution to an activist organization. And what we're seeing here is that Harvard's Board of Overseers is on board with this transformation. That is why they hired Claudine Gay as president, even though she is not at all a distinguished academic. And so we're seeing here a formerly great institution moving down this path of committing itself to left-wing activism. And of course, the whole, Hamas-Israel situation right into that.
Well,
James.
John, what I'm finding absolutely fascinating here is the way in which she's almost been excused. It feels like mostly peaceful plagiarism here is the way the media has been covering it. But what I want to ask you about, though, is I think back in 2006, Larry Summers was president of Harvard. He was a distinguished scholar, a distinguished economist, former Secretary of the Treasury, former chief economist, I think, at the World Bank, author of a number of books, papers, hugely distinguished career. He was summarily discharged because he gave a speech in which he suggested that there may be differences in the structure of male and female brains, which explain why some go into some areas and some others. He was roundly criticized, cashiered by Harvard. This here, as you say, Claudine Gay, not much chop of an academic, and she's allowed to stay. How does Harvard have any credibility anymore? And what is the end game for Harvard if it is just, how does it continue to attract and remain a credentialing institution if its sole credential is DEI nonsense?
Well, James, you're absolutely right. The difference between Larry Summers and Claudine Gay is ideology. Larry Summers didn't toe the left-wing line. Claudine Gay, even though she's not much of an academic, does toe the left-wing line. You ask a great question, though. Harvard has said that it is going to stop taking SAT scores from high school student applicants. So how is it going to pick a freshman class if it doesn't use the SATs? And almost every senior in high school in America has a 4.0 grade average, It's going to choose them according to essays they write, and they're going to judge those essays based on how closely they hew to the DEI line. And I think that where that leads, James, is to a steep decline in Harvard's prestige.
100%, Liz.
Absolutely. John, this week we learned that the Democrat mayor in Boston has sent out an email inviting people to a Christmas party unless you're white. 15 minutes later, she sent out another very hurried email, not to apologise for her segregation party, but to apologise for the fact that it was accidentally sent to some whites.
Yeah, it's a revealing story, Liz. I mean, the Boston City Council has 7 white members and 6 members of color, as they say. And Michelle Wu only intended to invite the 6 members of color to a bigger party that she was having at a city facility for what they call electeds of color. And she accidentally invited the white people that had to back off and say, "Oh, sorry, you're not invited after all." But again, there's a bigger story here. Some people in defending this said, well, this is nothing new. This group called the Electeds of Color has been around for more than a decade. And they have all kinds of events, for electeds of color. This is just one of them. And there's a couple of things about that. Number one, I'm not sure why anybody would want to have a Christmas party that is racially segregated. That just seems like a very strange thing to do. But the second thing, Liz, is that we are seeing increasing acceptance of segregation in the United States. We see it in instances like this. We see it in universities having segregated dormitories, segregated commencement ceremonies. It's just astonishing, for somebody who lived through the entire era of integration.
John Hinderaker, always great to chat to you. I hope that there will be plenty of coloureds and whites Christmas parties that you'll be attending there in the States. But in the meantime, a very Merry Christmas to you and your family. Thank you so much for coming on during the year, and we'll see you again next year, John. And as I said, I'm not going to say the American Happy Holidays because I hate that. Have a very Merry Christmas, John Hinderaker from Outsiders. Thanks, mate. Coming up after the break, a very positive, seasonal, cheerful, end-of-year Ice Age watch. Hello, you're watching Outsiders Weather and the Skeptics Ice Age Watch, the show that aims to bring you good news and tidings of joy at this time of year, and our final show of the year. As in all scientific pursuits, one must begin by identifying the problem before arriving at the solution.
There's a there's a mental health crisis around the world, Jake, that we hear people talking about. I think that one of the main reasons for that is that young people look at the fact that we are not yet solving the climate crisis or dealing with some of these other challenges. And we hear this word thrown around, polycrisis. Well, solving the climate crisis is a poly solution. We know what to do.
Whoa, steady on there, Al Gore. Poly-crisis, poly-solution. With respect, I say, that's poly-waffle, Mr. Gore. Poly-waffle. No, let's take it one step at a time. You claim there is a mental health crisis around the world, particularly amongst younger people. I agree. That's why we see this sort of nonsense, young people protesting about oil, as Liz was just talking about, by vandalising oil paintings, and that's just gluing themselves to the road. And you claim that this mass mental health crisis is due to insufficient action by our politicians to tackle climate change. Now, of course, you may be right, or, Mr. Gore, you may be wrong. But, and I am not a qualified psychiatrist, obviously, but allow me to pose what I believe to be an alternative theory to your own. Let us postulate that were we to place modern youth on the hypothetical shrink's couch, we might discover that the real cause of their perceived angst is possibly due to people like yourself, Mr. Gore, who have been terrifying impressionable young kiddies for 2 decades in their classrooms with movies like this.
Storms get stronger and more destructive. Watch the water splash off the city. This is global warming.
I felt so scared. Sorry.
Despair can be paralyzing.
Yes, Mr. Gore, despair can be paralysing. One could argue, Mr. Gore, that what I would describe as endless climate extremism and alarmism about disappearing ice sheets, dying polar bears, rising sea levels, droughts, floods, cyclones, is what led these kids to becoming depressed in the first place. But again, I stress I am no Sigmund Freud, and your theory is just as good as mine, I guess. But let's agree that one way to lift people's spirits is to give them good bits of news. Think positive, be happy, I say. Here's Siren Stav. Siren Stav is Oslo's Vice Mayor for Environment and Transport from the Greens Party, no less. And Siren Stav is responsible for Environment and Transport. And last year, she had a cracker of an idea to help save the planet. At a cost of around 100 million euros, Siren Stav signed a contract for shiny new electric buses that she promised would help the city transition to net zero, as well as saving the city money over the long term. Fantastic news. Indeed, in the sunny Oslo spring earlier this year, according to Eiseidler Bote Zeitung, 183 new electric articulated buses were delivered just in time for a balmy Norwegian summer. Quote, all in all, this is a win-win situation, Siren exclaimed excitedly as she encouraged other cities to follow Oslo's example. Now, I was hoping this would cheer the kiddies up, but alas, we know what happens to the best laid plans. It is now winter, and a particularly cold winter, and the buses are not doing quite so well at combating global warming in the freezing cold weather. Sadly, their batteries keep failing miserably in the icy cold. Quote, the range of the electric buses decreases drastically in the cold. The batteries run out more quickly, says the bus operator. The buses sometimes simply break down. Here's a good news story to cheer up the kiddies. Only last month, the media in Switzerland was running stories all about climate change and the, quote, challenging ski season to come due to global warming. Even the ABC back in August breathlessly reported a study that found more than half of European ski resorts are at very high risk from climate change, also known, of course, as global boiling. And The Guardian suggested a quarter of Europe's ski resorts faced scarce snow because of the climate crisis. So presumably some of those kiddies weren't surprised to learn that the Women's World Cup Super G race at St Moritz, Switzerland was cancelled last week. After all, there's nothing miserable millennials like better than a good cancelling to purify the spirit. Trouble was, the event was cancelled due not to too little snow, but due to too much snow. Indeed, according to the UK Telegraph on Friday, this has been, quote, a dream start to the season as ski resorts open following historic snowfall, said the headline. It's like the good old days, enthuses Nick Morgan, who has run tour operator Le Ski in the French Alps for more than 40 years. He's referring to the fact that the snow above 1,800 metres is already over 2 metres deep at many top French resorts. Statistics rarely seen until at least mid-winter. Now, that's what I call a happy Christmas story for the kiddies. So you see, if you happen to have a couple of millennials moping around the house this Christmas, bleating on about global boiling, there's plenty of good news stories out there if you only know where to look for them. So, and until next year, from me and the shivering, chattering teeth, frostbitten Ice Age Watch team, all we can say is...
nieuw uit te brengen. En het is zo'n goede plaat. Je ziet ze op de countdownbühne. Hier is Slade.
So much lefty lunacy, more and more every year. I mentioned before this council in Melbourne, James. Stonington Council, is it? City of Stonington?
Yes. Well, you've got this council, and they've decided to do the whole war on Christmas thing. And instead of saying Merry Christmas, it's now Make Merry. Now, I don't know exactly what that's supposed to mean.
That's a sentence fragment.
It's a sentence fragment. It's a sentence fragment. But it doesn't mean anything. And that's the whole point, you know, because if you think about where all of this, the reason why I think the war on Christmas is such a redolent thing that captures the attention of so many people. It's not just about, you know, Christmas and the holiday itself and what that's supposed to mean and different people's meaning of Christmas, but it is about the undermining, the kicking out the foundations of everything sort of shared in our society. Christmas used to be something, whether you were, you know, secular or not, you know, you could celebrate Christmas. You had different versions of it for everybody, but the point was that it was something that everybody could do. And, you know, what I think the left really wants, not to overanalyze it, but that's what I do, I overanalyze things, is that...
You only just noticed.
I only just
It's only taken you to the end of the year to notice.
It's a very quick point. Is that when people don't have shared meanings, then they're atomized, and then therefore, you know, the state can decide what it is that you believe in, and that's why you have so many people who get obsessed with whatever the current thing is, because there's not a shared thing.
Liz?
Yeah. Stonington literally said that they've done this to be more inclusive. Can you name me a single person who's offended by the word Christmas? I mean, if you're trying to suck up to the minorities, they love Christmas. Most of them actually, and notice it's always okay to tell the majority to be the ones to, go out without your Christmas. We don't want to offend minority groups. But it's okay to offend the majority by getting rid of our cultural norms like Christmas. The other place that did this was a shopping centre called Pacific Werribee, and they just put up signs saying, Merry everything. Merry everything. That is absolutely ridiculous.
This is happening also. There's other ways too. There is a council, Mossman Council, up in the north of Sydney, very posh, well-off council, where people are now saying, hey, Christmas lights could distract and upset nocturnal animals. Maybe let's not have our Christmas lights because it might, you know, terrify the possums.
The Mossman possum.
Yeah, they're
the
not getting
Mossman
their
possum.
sleep. They're not getting their shut-eye. Anyway, at least at the shopping centre, the outcry was so big, they had to tear it down and then start putting it
back. But that's a really important point you make there, Liz, because it is up to you, the people of Australia, mainstream Australia, out there in the shopping centre and all the rest, to say no to this woke garbage. It's only us who can do it.
It's not just that they're woke, it's that they're joyless, and joyless people want everybody else to be just as joyless as they are. So is what this all comes down to.
More joyful, be more joyful this Christmas.
Joy
Go for it.
on steroids. steroids. Soy on steroids. That's what we want.
Sandhurst, Liz, in the UK, that's the equivalent of Duntroon over there. They've hit on a brilliant woke idea, which is to... well, tell us.
Oh, just make it easier to get in. So if your academic standards aren't up to scratch, if you're obese, no, it's not quite that bad, but it doesn't matter anymore. Let's just lower our standards because they have an unprecedentedly bad recruitment crisis, not unlike here in Australia where we've seen committee hearings being told exactly the same thing. We're not recruiting. We're not even replacing ourselves at the rate that people are leaving. So their suggestion is just like, well, we'll just lower the standards. More people can get in. I mean, this is
the army. This is the officers' army.
The leaders.
You really want less talented people than we had before. The same thing might be applying to a Canadian fire truck company where I always say it's not about being diverse or inclusive or whatever. What's your priority? What's your number one priority? Well, here's the fire brigade in somewhere in Canada. I guess we get an idea from that visual what their priority is. Maybe not so much putting out the fires. Maybe this is virtue woke signalling is what it's all about. I'd rather just have someone turning up at the fire who is good at putting out fires. Just my personal thing, than someone who is necessarily of whatever minority group. Let's also mention, it's all come to pass now, James. Scientists we've now hit peak Malthusianism. Scientists are now saying that breathing is bad for the environment, James.
Well, and I guess you could say the mask slips, so to speak, doesn't it? But look, this is what we always do. We always knew that at the heart of this environmental movement is a real anti-human movement. Interestingly, Elon Musk was warning about this. He said a lot of the people who are pushing all of this stuff and the billionaires hate people. They think there's too many people, and this is where it all comes down to. You're breathing, you're the problem. They see us as the cancer on the planet and treat us accordingly.
Well, I look forward to them doing their bit by ceasing to breathe as soon as possible. I always say to people, once you understand the carbon they want to reduce is you,
exactly,
everything starts making sense.
100%, very great insight there. Javier Millet, we spoke to John Ruddock last week. He's already kicked off literally getting rid of bureaucracies, getting rid of ministries. He's doing it. He said he would beforehand. He showed us how he would do it, and he is doing it, which is fantastic. Great news there. Peter Dutton, take note. That's how you win elections. And, of course, we mentioned Dubai and COP28. It was snowing in nearby Saudi Arabia. The planet loves laughing at lefties like nothing else before. Well, as I said before, that's it for our show for the year. We will be back on January 21st, and we want to see you there at 9 a.m. But in the meantime, have a fantastic Christmas from all of us here at Outsiders, from all of us here at Sky News. Can't wait to see you next year. But all together, guys, Merry Christmas! And a Happy New Year. See ya.